Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. The first snow of the season had just begun to fall when Aurelia Hart pulled her wool scarf closer and stepped into her small Brooklyn apartment. She kicked off her boots. The soft clack echoed through the quiet room, a sound that soothed her but also reminded her of one simple truth. She was living alone. Warm yellow light washed over the white walls where her paintings hung in neat rows. The large monstera in the corner swayed slightly as cold air slipped in before she closed the door. Aurelia's apartment was always beautiful, always warm, always tidy. But tonight, with Christmas approaching, it carried a hollowness she couldn't deny. She let out a long breath and pressed a hand to her chest. 9 months single. Not painful like before, but just enough to make the holiday season feel sharper than usual. Aurelia pulled a small suitcase from under her bed. It had been there for over a week, ready for her trip home for Christmas. The morning train on the 23rd was already booked. Her family was waiting. She was waiting. At 32, no matter how strong or independent she was, no matter how hard she'd worked to afford this apartment, when Christmas came, all she wanted was to return to a place where she didn't have to pretend she was fine. She had barely opened the suitcase when, bang, the door flew open. Two figures stormed in like a blizzard. "Drop the suitcase, we have wine and carbs," Jules Rivera yelled. Sophie Tran followed behind, breathless but triumphantly raising a bottle of wine. "And string lights, we need vibes." Aurelia stared at them as if they had barged into the wrong apartment. "Oh my God, what are you two doing?" Her hand stayed on the suitcase. Jules jabbed a finger at it, narrowing her eyes. "Don't tell me you're planning to run off home and leave us here alone with Netflix and heartbreak?" Aurelia bit her lip. "I'm not running. I'm going home. It's Christmas." Sophie set the wine down and gently brushed Aurelia's hair. "You're homesick, aren't you?" Aurelia nodded. A tiny nod, but honest enough to make Sophie smile softly. Jules dropped onto the sofa, opened the pizza box, and said in a tone that mixed humor with tender concern, "Let's be real. If you weren't homesick, we'd worry. Everybody wants to go home this time of year." Aurelia sat beside her, shoulders slumping. "I'm fine. It's just, this apartment is lovely, but it doesn't know how to hug me." Both friends froze for 3 seconds. Then, "Oh my God!" Jules covered her face. "That line deserves an Oscar for holiday season tragic heroine." Sophie burst into fireworks-level laughter. Aurelia laughed too, a real laugh, light and trembling. But even that laugh couldn't hide the truth. She was lonely. She missed home. And she really didn't want this Christmas to be spent alone. Jules stood up, wrapped the Christmas lights around her neck, and turned them on. Tiny reflections danced across Aurelia's face, making her pale blue eyes shimmer. "We didn't come here to stop you from going home," Jules said, raising her wine glass. "We came to make sure that when you step onto that Christmas train, you'll be carrying our laughter with you." Sophie tapped her glass. "And to make this apartment less empty than usual, so it remembers us." Aurelia blinked. Warmth flooded her chest, so sweet her eyes stung. She clinked glasses with them and smiled. "Thank you. You two maniacs." "Crazy but loyal," Jules said. "It's our trademark." The night unfolded in the most lovable chaos. Pizza slipping, a bit of wine spilling onto the carpet, Sophie singing "All I Want for Christmas Is You" completely off beat, and Jules dancing like she was auditioning for Broadway. And Aurelia? She sat in the middle of the chaos, cradling her wine glass, her heart warming with every burst of laughter. That night, after Jules and Sophie had left and their laughter faded with the sound of footsteps down the hallway, Aurelia's apartment fell quiet in a very particular way. Not the heavy kind of silence, but a soft one, like when snow touches the ground and turns every noise into something gentle, white, and calm. Aurelia closed her eyes, and memory unspooled like a reel of film. The second summer. A rainy afternoon and vanilla ice cream melting on her hand. She saw herself standing under the tiny awning of her favorite ice cream shop, next to Leon, who was wearing a slightly wrinkled white shirt, his hair wet from the rain, yet somehow still retaining the effortless neatness that had made her fall for him at first sight. The rain was sudden and strong, drenching both of them as if they had just climbed out of a pool. A drop of melting ice cream slipped from Aurelia's cup and dripped onto her finger. She laughed at her own clumsiness, and right then Leon took her hand, lifting it gently as if he were handling something precious, and kissed the drop of cream so deliberately that she almost dropped the entire cup. "Now you're the one melting," he said, eyes glinting with warm mischief. Aurelia punched his shoulder lightly, but the smile she wore, unguarded, unrestrained, was the very smile Leon once told her he wished he could capture every morning with his camera, just to look at it again and again. They ran through the rain soaked to the bone, laughing like children, then took shelter beneath the subway station staircase, their breaths mingling in air scented with freshly toasted bread from a nearby shop. "Days like this," Leon said, eyes fixed on the raindrops caught on her eyelashes, "make me wish for one thing, a long porch where we could sit, drink hot cocoa, and watch the rain fall." She looked into his eyes for a long time, and in that moment, she knew she could love this man for the rest of her life, without regret. The third autumn, a wool scarf and a kiss on the forehead. They were walking through Bryant Park when a gust of cold wind whipped past, making her shiver. Leon immediately unwound his scarf, without a word, and wrapped it around her neck, adjusting it with both hands as if he had done so 100 times before. "Who goes out wearing such a thin sweater at the end of October?" he muttered, voice half scolding, half tender. His fingers brushed her neck unintentionally, leaving her momentarily breathless. "You said it'd be warm," she retorted, wrinkling her nose. "I was wrong," he said, then leaned down and kissed her forehead, a kiss that was both light and firm, like placing a tiny seal directly onto her heart. "Let me fix it." That kiss on the forehead, his habit, had once been the thing that made every morning easier for her and every night gentler. The fourth winter, their last Christmas together. It wasn't their first Christmas. It was their fourth. A Christmas of two people so familiar with each other that romance no longer needed effort. Simply being together was enough to make everything beautiful. Leon's apartment that day was messy in the way only longtime lovers understand. Strings of lights still in the box lying under the table. A tin of freshly baked cookies left open because Aurelia had sampled them. A wooden reindeer Leon was trying to assemble sitting lopsided with one ear askew. And in the middle of that cozy chaos stood the two of them, bathed in golden light, smiling the kind of smile only people in long, steady love ever share. Aurelia, wrapped in the wool blanket Leon's mother had knitted, sat on the sofa watching Leon wrestle with the reindeer. He looked tall and serious, eyebrows furrowing each time the stubborn screw refused to turn, and every time he sighed in frustration, she laughed so hard she had to cover her mouth. "Stop laughing." Leon turned toward her, half annoyed, half ready to laugh himself. "I'm serious." "But you look adorable," she replied, eyes curving like a crescent moon. Leon set the screwdriver down, stepped over to her, pulled her up, and kissed her forehead, quick but deep, as though his heartbeat had leaped from his chest for that one instant. "You're not allowed to call me adorable," he whispered, his forehead pressed to hers, his hand brushing her waist. "I'm trying to act like the man of this house." "House?" She raised an eyebrow, teasing. "You mean this?" Leon looked straight into her eyes, his smile fading, replaced by a seriousness that stilled even the winter air outside. "A house," he said, "because you're here." Something tiny cracked open inside her. Not broken, but opened, as if her chest expanded to hold something she couldn't yet name. They spent the rest of the evening decorating the tree, baking cookies, singing along to Christmas songs, and finally standing by the window, watching Brooklyn blanketed in snow. Leon hugged her from behind, his breath warm against her neck, hot enough that she had to rest her head on his shoulder to stay steady. "Aurelia," he murmured, voice threaded with warmth, "do you know, across 4 Christmases, the thing I love most isn't the gifts or the lights. It's waking up and finding you beside me." She turned to face him, placing her hand on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his sweater. "You say it like," she whispered, her voice suddenly catching, "you're certain about the future." Leon looked at her for a long time, so long the world outside blurred. "Aurelia," he said, "I've been certain for a long time." His kiss that night wasn't like the kisses of their early days. It was deeper, riper, warmer, saturated with belonging, like a vow that even if the world collapsed at that very moment, he would still kiss her once more. That night, she had no idea it would be their last Christmas together. Another memory intruded, darker, heavier, sharp as steel. The cafe where they had first met, windows fogged with steam, rain falling in long silver lines, each drop pounding on the awning like the heartbeat of someone about to say something they didn't want to say. Leon sat across from her, hands wrapped so tightly around his hot coffee cup that his knuckles turned red. "I got an offer," he said, voice so soft that Aurelia had to lean forward to hear. "A major project in Europe. And," she thought he would say, "I want you to come with me." But Leon looked down, avoiding her gaze, and what he said next tightened around her heart like a slow, merciless fist. "I don't believe we can survive long distance. I don't want to hurt you. If we continue, it'll hurt more later. Ending it now will be easier for you." Aurelia remembered not crying, not speaking, not holding on. She simply looked at him, the man who had kissed her beneath their Christmas tree, wrapped a scarf around her in autumn, run through the rain with her in summer, drawn plans for their future home on the living room floor over 4 sweet, golden years. And he couldn't even look back at her. In the blurred sound of rain, their 4-year love ended without slammed doors, without explosions, without shouting, just two people sitting still while something beautiful fell between them, quiet as a leaf slipping from its branch. 9 months had passed since that rainy afternoon. 9 months of telling herself she was fine. 9 months living on schedule, waking up, coffee, blueprints, meetings, deadlines, smiling just enough. And then at night, when the city finally quieted, her strength melted like snow against warmth, leaving only loneliness behind. The sadness no longer stabbed as it had at first, but lingered like a dull ache beneath her ribs, reminding her of a love so beautiful that even cutting into it tasted sweet. She hated that feeling, yet she knew that if her heart ever went silent, she would no longer be herself. Aurelia opened her eyes, her breath filling the empty room. No more sharp pain, no more anger, just a bittersweet aftertaste, like finishing the last piece of dark chocolate and realizing it melted before you could savor it again. She looked out the window. Snow was still falling, calm and proud. Tomorrow she would go home, where her mother's laughter lived, where her brother's teasing voice filled the air, a place where her heart could rest without pretending to be strong. But tonight she allowed herself to remember. And the memories, bright like Christmas lights and painful like an old winter song, took her back to where her heart had once belonged. Not to cling, but to prepare for what was coming. Something she didn't yet know. But Christmas did, and it was getting closer by the minute. 2 mornings before Christmas, the Hamilton and Rhodes office was filled with that soft winter light the city seemed to conjure effortlessly. Silvery gray, not gloomy, but smoothing everything out, slowing it all down. Aurelia stepped into the building wrapped in the ash-gray scarf Sophie had given her, her face gentler these days, her spirit steadier in a way that would have been impossible to notice just a few weeks earlier. Outside, New York stayed busy as ever. The crunch of shoes on thin snow, the hiss of automatic glass doors sliding open, the bright laughter from the downstairs staff chatting about holiday plans. She wasn't one of them this year, but that was the result of choices she made herself, and she accepted it without complaint. Aurelia walked into the office and set her coffee on the desk. She didn't even get to sit when Diana's voice floated from the end of the hallway. "Aurelia, can you step into the conference room for a moment?" The tone wasn't sharp or rushed, but it carried a formality that sent a cold line down Aurelia's spine. She followed her boss into the glass meeting room, where white light spilled across the table like a layer of fresh snow. Diana closed the door, turned around and exhaled like someone who had spent too many nights staring at a screen. "There's an issue with the Hamilton project," she said plainly. One sentence, enough to evaporate every bit of calm Aurelia had collected that morning. Diana laid out a large printout, the ground floor layout, marked with red lines that hinted at technical trouble. "The client wants the layout changed, immediately. They sent feedback last night. MEP says the new routing doesn't align with the old one. We need to reassess the entire system within 3 days." Aurelia looked up. 3 days? The entire system? Yes, and Diana placed her hand on the paper, her voice softening. You're the only one who knows every layer of this design. Anyone else would take twice as long. The air in the room slowed, not suffocating, just the kind that told her this couldn't be avoided. Aurelia inhaled, eyes dropping to the drawing as if it held an answer. She had rescued countless projects from the edge of a missed deadline, and this time it was her again. Diana spoke gently. If you say no, I won't force you, but I'll be honest, the company needs you. During the holiday rush, the words didn't feel like pressure. They felt like trust. And even though a small, sad note echoed inside her, Aurelia nodded. I'll handle it. Just 3 words, but Diana exhaled in relief as if she just prevented a bridge collapse. At lunch, Aurelia stepped outside, the cold wind waking her up in a way coffee never could. She took out her phone and opened FaceTime. After one ring, her mother's bright face appeared, eyes glowing under the warm kitchen lights of their familiar home. Aurelia, my love. Her mother was kneading dough, white flour dusting her apron like snow. Aurelia pressed her lips together, keeping her voice as light as possible. Mom, something came up at work. I have to stay in the city. Her mother didn't look surprised or disappointed. She simply tilted her head, one of those motherly tilts filled with understanding, soft as Christmas jam cookies. Christmas comes every year, sweetheart, she said, but career opportunities don't. We're not upset at all. Her father popped into frame holding a green and red wreath. Just stay warm and eat properly. That's Christmas enough for us. And right on cue, Theo dove into the screen like an overexcited puppy. Hey, big sis! On Christmas Eve, I'm FaceTiming you with the speakers on max so the whole neighborhood can hear. Aurelia laughed, covering her mouth as if her own warmth might overflow the tiny screen. Please don't embarrass me, she said. Theo grinned widely. No promises. The call ended with her mom's sleep under a blanket reminder and her dad's affectionate wink. That was all. Yet her chest grew so light she had to stand still for a moment to let the warmth spread like hot honey through her veins. That afternoon, while Aurelia was deep in rerouting the MEP structure, the office door burst open as if someone had kicked it. The elevator dinged. A young man with soft, messy brown hair stepped out, clutching his laptop like a frightened cat. Brendan Hale, a programmer from the floor below. He'd dropped by her office before. They'd shared a few casual conversations. And suddenly Brendan turned to her, awkward and flustered. Ms. Aurelia? I heard you're staying in the city this holiday. Yes, she nodded. Too much work. Brendan inhaled sharply, as if gathering a lifetime's worth of courage. Ms. Aurelia, he began, voice barely above a mic test. I know someone else who's also staying in the city on Christmas Eve. Someone lonely like you. Sophie fake coughed. Jules kicked her. Aurelia shot them a warning look. Brendan continued, face growing redder with every syllable. If you want, not a date. I mean, just 2 lonely people having dinner so the night feels less sad. Aurelia opened her mouth immediately, pure reflex. Brendan, that's sweet, but I think... Yes! Jules screamed like she was possessed. Aurelia whipped around. What? Sophie stepped forward, linking arms with her like a cop detaining a suspect. She means yes, yes. Aurelia's eyes widened. No, I do not. Jules clamped a hand over her mouth like she was snuffing out flames. Oh, hush. He asked you to dinner, not to sign a blood contract. Sophie nodded vigorously behind her. If you refuse again, I'm calling the FBI. Brendan blinked rapidly, gripping his laptop so hard the casing might crack. It's okay. If you don't want to, Jules gave Aurelia a strategic shove. Tell him. Aurelia looked at Brendan, his eyes full of tiny, fragile hope, like a puppy waiting for a pat, then at her 2 emotionally violent friends. She sighed. Defeat, total. Fine, she said in the resigned tone of someone surrendering to fate. I'll have dinner with you. Brendan lit up like a Christmas tree switching to full LED mode. Really? Jules threw her hands up in victory. Sophie did a tiny jump. Aurelia, trapped between their chaotic energies, felt like she'd just been kidnapped by her own support squad. But, she added, emphasizing every word, it is not a date. Brendan nodded like a robot. Yes, of course. I wouldn't dare. Jewel whispered to Sophie. Oh, he would. You can tell. Aurelia kicked Jules under the table. Jules only grinned as she had just orchestrated the matchmaking coup of her career. Aurelia looked up at the office ceiling, swearing she could see Santa smirking like he personally plotted this nonsense. Aurelia arrived at the restaurant in a cream sweater and a wine-red skirt. Simple, but enough for the candlelight to reflect off her skin in that warm, soft glow of a 90s Christmas movie. Jules and Sophie had practically shoved her out the door, insisting, "Tonight you'll melt someone's heart." Aurelia just laughed. This was simply a makeshift Christmas dinner with Brendan, the shy, four-eyed guy they kept trying to pair her with. The restaurant was warm enough that removing her coat felt like exhaling. A wreath hung by the window, soft jazz played in the background, and outside the snow fell thick and fragrant with winter. Brendan wasn't there yet. A waitress approached and handed Aurelia a folded piece of paper, the edges slightly bent, as if someone had held it for a long time. "Someone asked me to give this to you." Aurelia opened it, just 4 words. "Go to the rooftop, you'll understand." The handwriting, oh God, she recognized it instantly. Leon. A breath caught in her chest. Her heart slammed like a hammer against wood. Without waiting another second, Aurelia stood. She stepped into the elevator, her heart trembling, hot, filled with a fierce intuition, racing upward toward the rooftop. The rooftop door opened with a soft creak. So faint Aurelia couldn't tell whether it was real or just the echo of her heart pounding wildly inside her chest. And the moment the cold air swept in, carrying with it the breath of New York winter, of snow, of lights, and of memories once buried far too deep, she felt her feet step onto the cold tiles, not by reason or will, but by something older, something primal, something a person feels when confronted with what they once believed was gone forever. The rooftop was lit with countless tiny candles arranged along the railing, their golden flames trembling in the wind, like hundreds of miniature hearts beating out of sync with the winter night. Strings of warm lights wrapped around the metal rails like strands of stars dyed gold and deliberately laid down, beautiful in a restrained way. Not overly bright, but enough to create a space both warm and sacred, intimate to the point of being terrifying. And the snow. God, the snow fell as if it didn't descend from clouds, but from a heart breaking into soft white flakes, landing on Aurelia's hair, her coat, the sky, and all the empty places the light couldn't reach. And in the middle of it all, he stood there, silent, like a story abandoned halfway. Leon. He stood with his back to her, leaning against the railing, hands tucked inside the pockets of a dark coat, his tall frame outlined by the glow of 1,000 candles. Snow clung to his hair in the thin layers, as if someone had sprinkled fine sugar over it, and that slightly tousled look made him seem both exhausted and beautiful, the beauty of a man who had carried far too much longing through months spent without her. His broad shoulders were slightly lowered, like someone using the last of their strength to stand against the world. Aurelia froze in place, her heart beat so loud it seemed to make the candle flames tremble. He turned, and when his gaze met hers, those deep brown eyes, warm and wide, still the same, yet heavier, older, fractured, Aurelia felt the entire space compress into a single second, a second in which 2 hearts that once belonged to each other beat out of rhythm, yet still found one another in the chaos. Leon parted his lips, and his voice, oh, that voice, still held the same calm, velvety timbre. But beneath that calm was a faint tremor, the kind carried by someone stepping into a moment they had waited far too long for. Aurelia! Her name left him like a prayer, like a musical note slipping off the string because it had been held back for too long. Aurelia didn't answer. She didn't know if she could speak without her voice cracking open. Leon remained still. He didn't move toward her, didn't reach out, didn't take a single step, as though every inch between them was a boundary he had sworn to respect with whatever was left of him. He inhaled deeply, the breath unsteady, snow landing softly on his shoulder, as if trying to comfort him. Aurelia, he continued, eyes never leaving hers, not even for a heartbeat. I didn't come here to ask you to take me back. One sentence, and her heart missed a beat. He swallowed, his throat shifting visibly under the glow of the lights. I don't have that right, he said, slow and painfully sincere, like a man relearning humility after forgetting it for far too long. Not after what I put you through. The wind picked up. The string lights flickered like thousands of shaky memories. I came to ask for something else. Aurelia tightened her grip on the paper in her hand until it bent slightly, but she still didn't speak. Leon exhaled, his eyes carrying an ocean waiting to be released. I'm asking for a chance. His voice sank, as though tapping into the deepest note of his heart. Not to get back together, but to pursue you again. Aurelia closed her eyes for a second, not out of pain, but because too many feelings crashed over her at once. Old anger, old longing, the hunger for something she didn't dare admit, the fear that this was all illusion, and the truth that her heart was not as empty as she pretended. Leon continued, his words slow, earnest, devastatingly beautiful. I want to meet you again, he said, each word like a snowflake melting slowly on skin. To ask what kind of coffee you like, even though I already know. To ask if you're tired today, even though I've heard the answer hundreds of times. To walk beside you, not as two people who once belonged to each other, but as two strangers meeting for the first time, except with an old heart that finally knows how to cherish what matters. A tired, warm, bittersweet smile curved his lips, strangely beautiful. I'm asking to start from very far away, as long as the path still leads toward you. Aurelia opened her eyes and looked at him, for a long, long time, as if searching in his gaze for proof that these words were real, and not just Christmas-softened emotion, not something one mistakes under candles and falling snow. She still didn't respond, but the feeling inside her chest was already an answer, even if she couldn't say it yet. No words, no tears, no running to him, no accusations, no forgiveness. She simply walked to the small table he had prepared, pulled out a chair, and sat down, slowly, pridefully, gently, like a silent scene from a classic romance film. And Leon, the moment Aurelia sat down, closed his eyes, not in relief, but like someone witnessing a miracle they had once believed they would never touch again. He sat across from her, keeping a safe distance, an invisible promise that he wouldn't cross any boundaries without her consent. No one said the words yes, but the yes was already there, in the way she sat, in the way her breath steadied, in the folded piece of paper between them, like a tiny bridge spanning past and future. The wind kept blowing, the snow kept falling, the city below glowed like an ocean of lights, and on that rooftop, on a Christmas night, both of them once expected to face alone in different directions. Two people who no longer belonged to yesterday sat across from each other as if the world had offered them something incredibly rare, a chance to begin again. Not to love again, but to trace their way back to each other, step by step, as though they had never truly lost one another. Only now they finally knew what must be treasured. The wind on the rooftop softened as Aurelia took her seat across from Leon, as if Christmas Eve itself knew this was a moment that shouldn't be disturbed. Dozens of small candles, lined across the table and along the railings, cast a velvety golden glow, blending with the city lights below to create a shimmering scene so magical it felt like the world had briefly paused just for these two hearts. Leon sat in front of her, hands clasped under the table, not because he was cold, but because he was trying to anchor himself through the overwhelming nerves of beginning again. Aurelia, meanwhile, kept her back straight, her eyes bright yet undeniably cautious, like someone touching something once precious and once broken. No one spoke for the first few seconds, but it wasn't awkward. It was a quiet richness with meaning, the silence of two people who had spent 4 years together, who once knew each other's laughter and breathing patterns, now trying to relearn everything from the start. Eventually, Aurelia broke the silence, her voice soft as a ribbon. When did you prepare all of this? Leon glanced at the table, then back at her. His eyes were so gentle, Aurelia had to inhale to steady the flutter beneath her ribs. "When I found out you weren't going home tonight," he said quietly, "I just thought, if you were staying here alone, I wanted to give you a night that didn't feel lonely." Aurelia lowered her gaze to her glass, her lips trembling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "You don't have any obligation to do that," she murmured. "We're nothing to each other anymore." Leon smiled, tired but tender, the kind of smile that only appears when a man is honest, vulnerable, and terrified of losing someone more than anything else. "I know," he said. "I'm doing this because I want to." The air warmed around them, and Aurelia had to take a breath just to stay composed. A candle flickered between them, its glow pulsing like a small heartbeat knocking softly on their door. They began to eat. No heaviness, no rehashing mistakes, no talk about the breakup. Just tiny stories, small enough that it felt like they were meeting for the very first time, like two strangers gingerly laying down the first puzzle pieces of a new conversation. Leon told her about a cafe in the West Village with apple pie so good he nearly ruined his diet. Aurelia told him how Jules forced her to drink eggnog, and she almost spilled it all over her new dress from laughing too hard. They talked about how early the snow came this year, how the Rockefeller Center lights looked brighter than usual, and the Christmas movies they both had watched to the point of exhaustion, yet still rewatched every December. The conversation wasn't deep, wasn't heavy, but each word carried a small current of intimacy. At one point, when Aurelia reached for a napkin, her hand brushed lightly against Leon's. A brief touch, accidental, barely there, yet it shot through her skin like a spark. Aurelia withdrew instantly, startled by how intensely her heart reacted. Leon, however, didn't flinch. He didn't look down at their hands. He only looked at her, something warm igniting in his eyes, so warm that Aurelia's chest tightened with a soft ache, forcing her to turn her face away. A moment later, Leon set down his fork, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass, as if gathering courage, and spoke in a lower, truer voice. "Aurelia, there's something I want to tell you." She lifted her head, candlelight reflecting in her blue eyes like shards of glass catching fire. Leon drew a long breath. "When I left, I thought I was stepping into the biggest opportunity of my life," he began, and then just a few weeks later, I realized something that made it hard to breathe. Aurelia didn't interrupt, though her hands tightened slightly in her lap. "I realized," Leon said, voice thick with raw sincerity, "that my heart has only ever had one home. And that home isn't a country or a project or a chance." His gaze met hers, deep, steady, devastating. "My home is you." Aurelia closed her eyes, not in discomfort, but because his words struck the very place she tried to hide for months. Leon continued, slower, more vulnerable with every syllable. "I got back 3 weeks ago." The wind tousled his hair, snow catching on his lashes. "I turned down the project in Europe. Not because I expect forgiveness, not because I assume we'll get back together." He held her eyes and she felt herself falling into the quiet intensity there. "I did it because I finally understood that no career is worth losing you. No success can fill the space you left." The words warmed the air so much it felt like the snow had stopped being cold. Leon spoke the final line, soft as a late-night piano note. "And whether you give me another chance or not, I'm determined to pursue you again. From the beginning. The right way, slow, no pressure." Aurelia stared down at her hands. A snowflake slid from her hair onto the table and melted instantly against the warmth. She drew a long, steady breath and lifted her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time." She swallowed, eyes glistening. "I'm not fully healed. Some nights I think I'm fine, but then I realize there are still pieces inside me that haven't fallen back into place." Leon didn't interrupt, didn't say, "I'm sorry," didn't say, "I'll make it up to you." He simply smiled, a small, warm smile, like candle heat, like the sound of snow brushing fabric. So deep, Aurelia had to look away or risk falling for him too quickly. "Aurelia," Leon whispered, "I have all the time in the world." One sentence, but it stretched time itself, laying a long, steady path in front of them, a silent vow that he would wait, no matter how long. The wind blew, The candles bent, but did not go out. Aurelia looked up suddenly and caught Leon watching her with the expression of someone who has lost a person once and knows that if given another chance, he would hold on with both hands, with his whole soul, with all the words he never dared to speak. They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. The dinner of starting over didn't end with a kiss or a handhold or a sweeping promise. Just two people sitting under candlelight, in the snow, in winter breath and slow heartbeats, on a Christmas Eve too beautiful to call coincidence, too gentle to call fate, and warm enough to be called a new beginning. Since that snowy Christmas night glowing with golden candlelight, Aurelia's life didn't change in some dramatic, earth-shattering way. Nothing burst open, nothing crashed down with grand declarations. Instead, everything began moving in small rhythms, tiny ones, so subtle that anyone less attuned might have missed them entirely. But Aurelia wasn't that person, not after everything her heart had lived through. She sensed each shift the way someone in a quiet room can hear snow falling outside the window. Soft but undeniable, delicate but real. On the first morning after Christmas, she went to their old cafe, not because Leon had texted her, but because she wanted to. The place was exactly as she remembered. The bell chimed when she pushed the door open. Warmth rushed out like a gentle embrace, and the smell of hot cocoa mingled with the air, as if it were a lingering note from a song she once loved. Leona stood leaning against the counter, coat unbuttoned, dark hair still dusted with snowflakes that hadn't melted yet. His eyes lit up, not brightly, but with a warmth and sincerity that stole one beat from her heart. "You came," he said, and those two words were enough to hush the entire room. They sat at a table by the window, a cup of hot cocoa between them, marshmallows slowly dissolving. Their conversation didn't circle the past, didn't touch wounds, didn't ask why or how. They spoke about rain-soaked sidewalks, about how the new barista made the milk foam too high, about the faint pine scent still clinging to her coat. When her fingers brushed his as they both reached for the spoon, a small current ran through her, like the quiet pluck of an old guitar string. Neither of them commented on it. They didn't need to. That was how the slow burn began. A few days later, on an afternoon cold enough that every breath turned into a white cloud, Leon invited her to Bryant Park's skating rink. He didn't write a long message, just, "If you want to move a little and laugh a bit, I have 2 tickets." The moment Aurelia read it, she knew she wasn't going to refuse. Or maybe she hadn't truly intended to refuse from the second she saw his name on her phone. Aurelia hadn't even properly stepped onto the ice before she lost her balance. And in that split second, before panic could rise, Leon's hand gripped her waist. He pulled her toward him without thinking, and suddenly they were standing there, her half leaning into him, his warmth seeping through her coat. His breath brushed her hair, and for a moment long enough to distort time itself, they stood suspended in a closeness that once belonged to them so completely it almost hurt. Leon let go first, slowly, respectfully, like someone who didn't want to startle her. "Sorry," he murmured, voice lower than usual. "I just reacted." Aurelia looked into his eyes, the same brown eyes holding everything he didn't dare say aloud. "I know," she replied, voice soft as snow landing on skin. "It's okay." But was her heart okay? It raced faster than her skates could ever glide, and the terrifying truth was, she didn't want it to slow down. They skated longer, not too close, not too far, just enough for Aurelia to understand that Leon was learning how to keep his distance, not because he wanted to, but because she needed him to. Another evening, Jules and Sophie stormed into Aurelia's apartment like an emotional blizzard. "Sit down!" Jules shouted like a detective conducting a raid. Sophie held up a whiteboard. "We are convening the Relationship Evaluation Council," Aurelia groaned. "No way. How many times did you smile when you were with him?" Jules pressed. 3 times, Sophie answered calmly, according to Brendan's report. "Who allowed Brendan to report anything?" "He took initiative," Jules replied, smug. "So, how did you feel when Leon held your waist on the ice?" Aurelia froze. "Did I tell you that?" "No," Sophie said. "But your face just did. And that counts as confirmation." Aurelia threw a pillow at them, but couldn't stop the smile tugging at her lips. She realized she had been smiling too much, too easily, too naturally since Leon returned. And that was not a bad sign. In the days that followed, their lives began weaving together again, through quiet evenings, unplanned walks, lattes left on her doorstep in the morning without a note, just steam proving he'd been there minutes before she woke. One morning she bumped into him at the old bookstore down the street. No plans, just a coincidence, or perhaps the universe remembering where they once fit. They leaned together over a book on architecture, and their shoulders brushed, just lightly, but her body registered the contact more vividly than anything else that day. Leon tilted his head to read a caption, and his hair nearly touched hers. Neither spoke, yet the silence wasn't awkward. It was ripe, warm, pulling their hearts closer. Another night, they walked beneath strings of lights that hung like tiny galaxies. Snowflakes drifted like powdered sugar, settling on her hair. Leon mentioned learning to cook in Europe and nearly blowing up the oven. Aurelia laughed so hard she bent forward, and Leon paused, just watching, like every time she laughed was a gift he hadn't dared hope to receive again. Then it happened, so small that anyone else would miss it. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away, neither spoke. Their fingers simply remained side by side, sharing warmth. The silence between them was no longer a wall. It had become a bridge. One weekend evening, snow piled so thickly that the city became a cotton-white blanket, and they sat on a park bench where the streetlights glowed like melting gold in the snow. Leon looked at her bare hands and asked quietly, "Are you still cold?" "No," she replied, even though her fingers were freezing. Leon knew. But he didn't take her hand. He simply slipped off his gloves and offered them to her, fingers brushing hers for the briefest second. Enough to tell her how fiercely he was restraining himself, refusing to repeat old mistakes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so soft the wind almost carried it away. Leon tilted his head, eyes dark and deep like winter lakes. "I'm not rushing, Aurelia. Not this time. If you need time, I'll move at your pace. What matters most," his voice softened further, "is that you don't feel pressured?" Her heart clenched, because she knew every word was real. And so, through tiny dates, brief pauses, and glances long enough to warm her from the inside out, love began returning. Not with fireworks like the first time, but with the maturity of two people who once lost each other and understood that losing each other again was something neither could survive. Aurelia still didn't name her feelings, didn't fully admit them, didn't fling her heart wide open. But she knew one truth deep in her bones. She was smiling more, breathing easier, feeling lighter, and the heart that had been frozen for months was thawing, slowly, tenderly. Leon looked at her like a man who finally understood that love wasn't something to conquer. It was something to keep, to protect, to cultivate with patience, and a heart sharpened by regret and longing. He carried the quiet determination of someone who had lived days without her just to learn one thing. He never wanted to live a single day without her again, and just like that, through the softest, smallest, truest details, Aurelia realized something. Love doesn't always return with lightning. Sometimes it comes back as warmth, slow, gentle, but certain, exactly like the way Leon was walking beside her now. Winter afternoon fell over the city with a soft, fragile light, as if the sky were breathing more slowly, more deeply, afraid of disturbing the thin layer of snow coating the ground. The strings of lights along the park blinked on even before dusk fully arrived, their golden glow stretching across stone benches, bare branches, and the drifting sheets of white that the wind lifted into glittering spirals like strands of tinsel. Aurelia and Leon walked side by side, their footsteps leaving two long parallel trails in the fresh snow. The distance between them was just close enough for their sleeves to brush whenever she adjusted her pace. Around them, New York shifted into its final moments of the year, buzzing from afar, but so peaceful here that they could hear the faint crackle of snow settling on the trees. Aurelia tugged closer the scarf Sophie had given her and flexed the gloves she'd knitted back in late November. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, though beneath the chill, something warmer had been gathering quietly inside her chest these past few weeks, ever since he came back. Leon walked beside her, his dark coat standing out against the snow. Each of his steps was steady and unhurried, as though he matched her rhythm on purpose. Since Christmas Eve, he hadn't rushed, hadn't pushed, hadn't tried to grab at their past with the desperate force of a man afraid of losing twice. He was calm, so calm that sometimes Aurelia glanced at him, just to make sure he hadn't dissolved into the whiteness around them. And maybe that was exactly what made her heart tremble. This version of Leon who knew when to step back, when to remain silent, when to wait with a patience earned only after a year of growing up. The wind drifted through the park, carrying the scent of pine from the Christmas lights circling the lake. Aurelia pulled her scarf tighter. Leon noticed, then asked in a low voice, "Are you cold?" "Not much," she replied, though he heard the slight tremble more than the words. They walked a few more steps, and when they reached the curve of a small bridge, Leon stopped. Aurelia stopped too, partly surprised, partly sensing that he had finally gathered enough courage to say what they both knew would eventually need to be said. He turned toward her, his breath forming soft clouds in the air. His deep brown eyes were full of both light and shadow, mirroring everything they had endured the past year. "Aurelia," he said, and his voice was so low she felt it ripple through the snow beneath their feet. "I've wanted to say this for a long time, but I was afraid that saying it too soon would hurt you again." She didn't answer. She simply looked at him, intent, steady, as if each word he was about to speak had the power to shift the air around them. Leon swallowed, an action so subtle yet so raw, it made her heart ache in the sweetest, cruelest way. "I used to be terrified of distance," he said, eyes following the golden reflections on the lake. "Terrified of the time zones, of the weeks without seeing you, of the fatigue that might make me forget how to love you right. I was afraid of losing you, in ways I didn't even see coming." Aurelia felt her chest tighten slowly, like an old wound trembling at the exact moment it was touched, not by excuses, but by the truth. Leon inhaled deeply, then looked straight at her. "But now," he said, and his voice turned so honest she didn't dare blink, "there's only one thing I'm afraid of. One thing." Her heartbeat stumbled, not out of fear, but because something invisible was pulling her closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth of his touch, the cold air around her. "What are you afraid of?" she whispered, barely more than breath. Leon held her gaze for one beat longer than a heartbeat, then spoke, slow as falling snow melting on her gloves. "I'm afraid of losing you again." The entire park seemed to fall silent for one suspended second. The wind paused. The snow drifted more slowly. The golden lights reflected on Leon's face, illuminating his eyes with the glow of someone speaking their deepest, most unfiltered truth. Aurelia looked at him, a long, deep look layered with emotions too intricate for words. For months, she had believed she'd closed her heart. She'd convinced herself that the wound from March would never fully heal. But in this moment, staring into Leon's eyes, eyes that knew regret and knew love, she realized her heart had never been locked. It had only been afraid of opening for the wrong person. And now in front of her stood a man who no longer rushed, no longer wavered, no longer fled, but someone who had gone far, far away just to learn how to stay. Aurelia drew a slow breath. She stepped closer, just half a step, but enough to make Leon flinch softly, like he was holding back every instinct to pull her into his arms. She raised her hand and touched the collar of his coat. Her fingertips brushed the cold fabric, then the warmth of his skin just below his collarbone. Leon held his breath. She felt it so clearly it hurt. "Aurelia," he murmured, voice low and soft as a brown silk ribbon. She didn't answer. She simply lifted her face and pressed her lips to his. The kiss wasn't the kind shared by two people falling in love for the first time. It was the kiss of two souls who had lost each other, who had hurt to the very ends of themselves, and who had learned to believe again in something as fragile as a heart. Her kiss was soft but deep, trembling yet sure, like Christmas lights glimmering on melting snow, beautiful in a way that made you wish time would stop. Leon responded a beat too slow, as if he needed to confirm she was truly kissing him. Then in the next second, when the truth settled in, his hand rose to cradle the back of her head. the gentleness of the gesture sending a shiver down her spine. He didn't rush. He didn't claim. He kissed her back with everything he hadn't dared say for a year. The missing, the regret, the love that had never gone out. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but for them, it could have been the whole winter. When they pulled apart, their breaths mingling in small white clouds, Aurelia felt her lips tingling, and her heart, for the first time in many months, beating with life instead of fear. Leon rested his forehead against hers, his voice hoarse but warm. "If you'll let me, I want to start over from this exact moment." Aurelia looked at him, her gaze as soft as golden lights on snow, and she didn't say a word. She simply placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart, beating hard enough for her to feel every thud. And that silence was the most beautiful answer of all. The road leading back to the small town where Aurelia grew up was covered in a thin layer of snow, white enough that sunlight didn't make it blinding, but instead made it look like an endless bridal veil stretching toward the horizon. Leon drove slowly past rows of leafless trees, the wind gently nudging the wreaths hung on the doors of little houses along the way. Aurelia sat in the passenger seat, fingers tightening on the edge of her wool scarf, her hands interlaced even though the car wasn't cold. She hadn't said much since morning, just a few brief remarks about the weather, about how her mother was surely making her favorite apple pie, about how Theo would make a scene the moment he saw her. But Leon understood that her silence wasn't stifling. It was like a long exhale before opening an old door, a door leading back to a place that once held her entire world. "Nervous?" Leon asked softly, eyes still on the road. Aurelia bit her lower lip. "A little. My mom likes you, but this time is different. This time you're not just a boyfriend, or someone from the past. You're—" She didn't finish the sentence. Leon didn't push her to. He just smiled, a small, gentle smile, soft enough to untie every knot in her chest. "Someone trying to be worthy of you," he said. That was all, and the heaviness inside her lifted. Her mother's house appeared at the end of the road, a pale blue wooden home with low steps and round windows, the very place where Aurelia once sat, sketching her first designs with cheap pencils. Smoke drifted from the little chimney, and the scent of cinnamon and apples floated through the air, as if the house itself knew today was important. Her mother opened the door before they even reached the steps. "Aurelia!" Her voice was warm, like honey lightly heated. Aurelia threw herself into her mother's embrace, inhaling the familiar scent of almond soap. When her mother released her and spotted Leon behind her, holding a bouquet of white tulips, her smile widened, a smile Aurelia hadn't seen her give anyone else all year. "Leon," her mother said, stepping forward to hug him, as though welcoming home a son who'd been gone far too long. "I'm glad you're here." Aurelia stood there, her chest suddenly so warm she had to clench her fist to keep from crying. Some wounds are healed only when the person you love is accepted again, fully and without condition. "Thank you," Leon murmured, his voice low and slightly unsteady, as though even he hadn't expected the swell of emotion rising in him. Aurelia had to look away for a second. The atmosphere inside the house was the kind of warmth Aurelia hadn't felt for a year. The golden glow from the old wooden dining table, the embroidered tablecloth her mother had kept since her wedding day, the clatter of knives and cutting boards in the kitchen, and Theo barreling down the stairs like a small bear. "Big sis!" Theo hugged her so hard she nearly lost her breath, then turned to stare at Leon like he was assessing his worth in 3 seconds flat. "If you leave her again," Theo said, voice solemn to the point of absurdity, "I'll tie you up and post you on the internet." Leon burst into laughter, a deep round sound that made his shoulders shake. "Thank you for the clarity," he replied, "and I promise not to give you the chance to try that." Theo nodded once. "Good!" Aurelia felt her heart expand another inch. The evening unfolded with such warmth it felt like someone was pouring golden light directly into memory. Her mother served her usual birthday dinner: creamy potato soup, crispy roast chicken, warm apple pie scented with cinnamon and butter, and a small cake topped with glossy red berries. They ate, they laughed, they retold old stories, how Aurelia crashed into a pile of leaves when she first learned to drive, how Theo nearly burned the oven trying to bake cookies, how they spent summer nights on the porch watching fireworks. Leon listened to every tale with bright eyes, as though he were piecing together the parts of her life he'd missed. Aurelia watched him, how he nodded, how he laughed when her mother spoke, how he complimented the food sincerely rather than politely. And something inside her settled, like a smooth stone finally finding its rightful place along a riverbank. Leon belonged here. He belonged in this house. He belonged to this family. And slowly, so slowly, he was belonging to her again. Later, when the house quieted down, Theo helping their mother wash dishes, the sound of running water blending with jazz from the old radio, her father and Leon watching television, Aurelia stepped out onto the porch for some air. The cold turned her breath into little clouds. The leftover birthday decorations cast a soft golden glow over the steps. A moment later, Leon joined her, closing the door behind him so gently the sound was barely audible. They stood side by side, just half an arm's length apart, staring at the snow-covered backyard. "Aurelia," he said softly, as if placing his hand on her name. She turned. The light from inside fell on his face, across the strong lines of his jaw, into the depths of his brown eyes, dark as a winter night where nothing is clear, but everything is strangely beautiful. "I've wanted to say this since dinner," Leon said, his breath mingling with the cold air. "But I think here, standing where you grew up, is where it belongs." Aurelia held her breath. He looked at the yard, at the little house, at the potted plants her mother tended, then back at her. "I don't want to be just someone you love," he said, each word falling onto the snow like something sacred. "I want to build the rest of my life with you, anywhere. But if I could choose," he swallowed lightly, "I'd want to start here, with the things that made you who you are." Aurelia didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply reached out and took his hand, slowly, firmly, like a vow. Her gaze held his, long, so long, that Leon knew. She had chosen him, not out of nostalgia, not because time softened the past, but because her heart, for the first time in a year, had fully stepped into the world where he stood waiting. And their hands intertwined beneath golden light in winter wind were the most beautiful answer of all. A year passed so quickly that sometimes Aurelia felt as if she had only closed her eyes for a moment. And suddenly the dark, heavy days after the breakup had softened into a gentler version of herself. Someone who loved slowly, trusted again, and understood that some hearts once shattered could heal into something even more beautiful. Their new apartment, perched high above a snow-covered New York City, had been redesigned entirely by her. Warm white walls, cascading green plants hanging from wooden shelves, and a balcony wide enough for two people to stand and look out at the night sky. Tonight, that balcony was its own mini-galaxy. Christmas lights draped along the railing, golden sparks dancing over the snowfall drifting down from above. The wind carried the faint scent of cocoa from the small kitchen where Leon always took his milk-warming responsibilities ridiculously seriously, meticulously heating, pouring, and dusting cinnamon, tasting it every time, as if he were guarding a secret recipe. It made Aurelia laugh every single time. "It's beautiful tonight," Aurelia whispered as she stepped outside, wrapped in a soft white sweater. Snowflakes clung to her dark hair like tiny glowing specks. Leon stood a few steps away, leaning against the railing, his hands tucked into the pockets of his dark coat. A few flakes caught in his black hair. He turned to her, and the way he looked at her slowed the world down, as if the entire city behind them blurred out, leaving only two figures in the frame. "I think tonight," he said quietly, "might be the prettiest night of the year." His voice was low and warm, and Aurelia felt her hands curl into the hem of her sweater, as if holding it in place could keep her heart from tumbling out of her chest. She stepped beside him, resting her hands on the railing, gazing at the glowing city, the storefront Christmas trees, the red, green, gold signs, the people rushing by with oversized gift bags. A breeze carried the sound of church bells from nearby, turning the whole scene into something straight out of a classic Christmas film. "I never thought I'd be this happy," Aurelia murmured, eyes still on the city lights. Leon looked at her, like she was the brightest thing in the night. "Can I say something?" he asked. She turned. "Say it." Leon pulled his hands out of his coat pockets and stepped closer. So close she could feel his breath against her cheek, cool from winter air, yet warmed by that familiar tenderness he always carried. "Every morning I wake up next to you," he whispered. I can't believe how lucky I am." Aurelia let out a soft laugh, fragile, breathy, almost dissolving into the wind. "You're being dramatic." "No," Leon murmured, eyes never leaving hers. "Aurelia, you have no idea how much you've changed me. You made me want to try harder, be better, be patient. You were the reason I came back, the reason I stayed, the reason I want to—" He paused, emotion tightening his voice. A gentle gust blew snow across Aurelia's hair. She looked at him, her whole body small amidst the winter cold, but her heart beating faster, faster, sensing what was coming. Leon stepped back, not to distance himself, but to create space. Space for the moment that would change everything. Aurelia watched him, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. Leon knelt, slowly, steadily, as if he were bowing before the most sacred thing in his life. Snow settled on his shoulders, his hair, his lashes. The Christmas lights behind him formed a soft golden halo, so beautiful that Aurelia had to press her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. "Aurelia, heart." His voice was low, deep, thick enough to wrap around her heart. "Grant me the honor of pursuing you." He looked up, eyes unwavering, filled with the certainty of a man who finally understood what it meant to love and be loved. "And for the rest of my life." Aurelia brought a hand to her chest, breath catching in a sharp ache. Leon opened a small dark box in his hand, simple, understated, and inside was a white gold ring with a diamond so clear it reflected the string lights behind him. "Be my wife?" A question so gentle it made even the wind seem to pause. Aurelia burst into tears, not the tears of pain she once knew, but the overflowing cry of someone whose heart was suddenly lifted by the hands of the man she loved. She laughed and cried at the same time, shoulders shaking, eyes shimmering under the golden lights. "You idiot!" she whispered, voice breaking. "Leon, I—" But she couldn't finish. She only nodded, a fierce, trembling nod that sent strands of her hair flying, a nod that said everything she could not put into words. Leon rose in one deep breath, as if he had been freed from a year-long dream. He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she felt every bit of his warmth flooding into her, filling every empty space life had once carved out. Aurelia wrapped her arms around his neck, pressed her cheek to his shoulder, letting her tears soak into his coat. "I love you," she whispered clearly, fully for the first time since they found each other again. "I love you so much. Sometimes I'm afraid my heart won't hold it all." Leon held her tighter. He kissed her hair, her cheek, and finally her lips. A kiss deep, slow, trembling, sealing this moment into both their memories so that they would never forget how two hearts felt when they found each other under Christmas snow. Aurelia kissed him back, her lips warming, her heart opening wide. Everything she had lost, everything she had feared, everything she had once mourned, melted into that kiss like snow meeting candlelight. When they finally parted, their breaths blending in soft white clouds, Leon rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for choosing me again." Aurelia touched his cheek, her eyes still wet but glowing with unwavering certainty. "Not again, Leon," she said softly. "This time, it's forever." They held each other long enough for snow to gather on the steps, the railing, even on the shadows they cast on the wall. The city behind them shimmered in festive red, gold, green, as if celebrating with all the light it had. And on that balcony, amid snow, golden lights, church bells, and the warm scent of cocoa lingering from the kitchen, a promise was made. A promise soft as snow, strong as winter, and beautiful as Christmas light reflected in the eyes of someone in love. They kissed again and again, and in that moment, their story didn't end. It began. In the truest, most beautiful sense of the word, begin. 10 years later, the morning sunlight poured into the house like liquid honey dripping down white walls. That house, a modern wooden home with clean, minimalist lines, wide glass doors overlooking a lavender-filled garden, and an attic turned into an art studio, wasn't built only from wood, steel, or blueprints. It was built on a promise, the promise made on that snowy balcony, a promise kept. Aurelia walked down the wooden stairs barefoot, her long hair loosely tied back, wrapped in a cream sweater that Leon claimed looked like the first light of day. From the kitchen came the sound of children laughing, spreading fast, spreading wide, spreading straight into her heart. "Mommy, Lena ate my marshmallow again." The voice belonged to Elena, 9 years old, sharp, quick-witted, and stubborn like Leon, but with her mother's round brown eyes, protesting with the dramatic indignation of someone betrayed in the gravest of matters. Morning cocoa. Giggles followed. Lila, 7, with curls soft as fresh snow, the serial marshmallow thief who always saved the biggest one for her sister, peeked out from behind the kitchen island. Aurelia paused before stepping inside, letting her heart record the moment. Her 2 daughters racing around the kitchen island, hair flying, Leon standing there in a charcoal apron, wooden spoon in hand, eyes lighting up the moment he saw her, as though after 10 years, seeing her each morning was still the thing he was most grateful for. "All right, my 2 princesses," Leon chuckled, voice still deep enough to make Aurelia melt. "Marshmallows are not worth starting a Cold War, but Daddy will attempt multilateral negotiations, "It's not fair. Lila always wins," Elena protested. Lila hid behind her father, face pressed into the apron like a tiny cat. "Because I'm cute." Leon laughed, bent down, and kissed her head. "You are cute." Aurelia crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Does everyone know who's the cutest here?" 3 heads snapped toward her, and right then, Aurelia's heart ached. Not with pain, but with a soft, beautiful, deep ache, like sunlight passing through memory. They were once 2 people lost in New York, searching for each other. Now they stood as a family in a house they designed a decade ago. Leon's lines, Aurelia's colors, both of their dreams. "Mommy!" Lila ran over and hugged her legs. "I want to wear my purple twirly dress today." "And I," Elena added, "want Mommy to take me on the bike, not the car." Aurelia laughed, scooping both girls into her arms. "Deal. But Daddy has to tie Mommy's hair first, or the wind will turn it into a bird's nest." Leon leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms, his eyes full of the kind of warmth only a truly happy man carries. "I do that every morning," he said, walking toward her, gently placing a hand on the back of her neck, while their daughters squealed beneath them. "And I never get tired of it." Aurelia looked at him, a look long enough to compress 10 years into a single breath. That evening, when the girls were asleep in their star-lit bedroom, Aurelia stepped outside onto the porch. Leon stood there already, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking up at the sky, his silhouette carved against the night. Snow was falling, soft, silent, just like the night they promised forever. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. Aurelia joined him at the railing, gazing at the backyard glowing beneath the warm golden lights, snow catching the light like scattered shards of mirrors. "Do you remember that night?" Leon asked. "Which night?" Aurelia replied, though her voice was already soft enough to betray the answer. "The night you nodded," he said quietly. "The night I realized I could breathe again." Aurelia tilted her head toward him. "Tonight feels like that night," she whispered. Leon stepped closer, close enough that their 2 shadows merged into one beneath the porch light. "Better," he murmured, his hand at her waist, "because now we have a whole life built from that moment, and 2 little girls in it." Aurelia laid her palm over his chest, over the steady, strong heartbeat beneath his shirt. "Leon," she breathed, words almost too soft for the wind to carry. "Did we really do it?" He pressed his forehead to hers, their breaths mingling like mist. "Not just did it," he whispered. "We made it beautiful." In the falling snow, he kissed her, a slow, deep kiss, the kind shared by someone who has loved the same person for more than a decade, and whose heart still sparks every time their lips meet. Aurelia kissed him back, arms around his neck, holding not just him, but the years behind them, the breakup, the longing, the reunion, The trembling hands on that rooftop, the proposal in the snow, the candlelit wedding, the laughter of their daughters, and the house they built, where love grew brighter each day like new sunlight. When they finally pulled apart, Aurelia rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm so happy," she whispered. Leon held her tighter, voice low and steady with peace. "So am I, and I'll love you for the next 10 years, then 10 after that, and every year after." Aurelia laughed softly, leaning into him. "The real estate of my heart," she said, "is officially under your management." Leon chuckled. "The sound of a man exactly where he wants to be, and I'll take care of it the way I take care of this house," he murmured, never letting it sit empty. Snow continued falling, light, glittering, like blessings from the sky. Inside the warm house lit with golden light, their daughters slept beneath star-shaped lamps, and outside Aurelia and Leon stood wrapped in each other's arms. Two people, one love that survived, blossomed, grew, and found its future in children's laughter, the smell of warm pastries, and a home where the lights never go out. Their love didn't just endure, it grew up, and then it became a family.